I think we're ready.
All right.
Call us to order. I understood we do not necessarily need to call roll for this meeting.
We can. There's certainly just the two of you. We can probably, if we would say, freely admit that our quorum is met. We have with both you, Commissioner, as well as Secretary Hargett in the room. I will have an announcement. So Ms. Burchett was fell sick this morning, so she emailed she's not going to be able to make it today. I gave her the link in case she's feeling better. I think she might be on the way to the doctor's though, so she may join later. But just want to give that announcement. It's just the two of you today.
Okay, thank you. Should we start with the review of the minutes?
Yep.
All right. Secretary, I've reviewed the minutes. Anything you see we need to discuss?
No, sir.
I'll make a motion to approve the
I'll
minutes.
second.
Motion and second. All in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes.
Well, welcome to the meat of the presentation. Should be relatively quick. I have our annual update, sort of on what our operations have been, as well as a snapshot of currently standing appeals. So let me get into my PowerPoint. You got a copy of there as well. I'll walk through on the screen. So our updates are biggest Assessment Appeals Commission is officially closed. We had a wrap up before the end of fiscal year. We did that back in March, and that's what has been a lot of the last year is concluding all those pending appeals. We had some rulemaking that we saw at our last meeting, as well as some rulemaking we probably need to still update. I'll then go through a quick appeals update, sort of what's going on with appeals, sort of some functional changes, as well as the current status. And then talking about case management and pre-scheduling as part of that update. So the Assessment Appeals Commission officially closed. All those appeals have been heard and final. Parties now wishing to appeal an initial decision in order may appeal directly to Chancery Court, or they can, as we've seen, petition the members of the board for review. The board otherwise has broad authority in that process to handle those petitions as they see fit or adopt rules on how those petitions are to be addressed. I thought I would just take a moment to go over some of the functional realities of that. So there's a functional deadline in order to get your appeal on the next State Board of Equalization meeting. Mostly that just includes you have to have one, filed the appeal, and then two, we want to make sure to have a copy of the entire administrative records. That's going to be the initial decision in order, the entire technical record that was included, as well as the audio recording or transcript if available, and as well as I make sure to issue a letter to the parties to make sure they are aware that their appeal is on schedule for the next board meeting. So when all those things are in place, that we'll put them on that board meeting agenda item. And so that's why there's kind of a functional deadline. You can't do it the day before the meeting because obviously we couldn't get all those materials in place. But we do try to get those in as soon as we can. With rulemaking, so we saw that was public comment parameter, and or if you have any questions about sort of how the board wants to handle those or have any feedback, well, welcome to let me know now or later. Reach me at your convenience for those pending petitions. Moving forward to rulemaking, we did just do our public comment parameters, adopting those same public parameters we've had for the board for a while now. The next thing is to make sure we finish updating our contested case proceedings, just sort of recognizing some of the substantive updates, the lack of the commission, the sort of new standard and everything going on with that, as well as some of our filing system quirks, just to make sure that people kind of how do I say this? The updates to filing system requirements, just to make sure people are aware, to make sure the rules fully kind of mimic that and are transparent as much as possible. And more so transparent in our rules. And so with that, part of the transparency is we have this fun graphic on our website. And so all this is moving into the appeals update section of the presentation. So we have this is the life cycle of an appeal to kind of give people a heads up as they file what to expect in their appeal process. So we see that those appeals are first filed and then we review and accept those appeals. So there are some appeals we cannot accept. So for instance, you couldn't appeal tax year 2020 right now. And so if you tried to, that would be one appeal we could not accept because there's a jurisdictional time requirement for that. Once your appeal is filed, we go through the status and scheduling process, which is largely with me and a couple of my staff members, where we make a scheduling conference with the parties to appear. We generally ask, are you ready to go to a hearing? Or are you not ready? Or are you still working on your appeal? So you'll see that's kind of a circle because you can kind of go around, I call it the merry-go-round, several times to kind of get people to see if you're ready to go to a hearing, we can get you there as soon as you're ready. If you're not, because you're still working on it, you're still preparing your appraisal, you're closer to settlement, you're trying to figure out what you want to do next, you can we'll set a future date and come back. So a large part of what we're doing internally before we go to a hearing is trying to narrow down those appeals and figure out what's actually ready and what actually wants to go to a hearing, so we can get that forward. Once you're actually prepared and you say, yes, we're ready for a hearing, we issue a notice of hearing. That's where we officially transfer the appeal over to the Administrative Procedures Division. And then from there, they'll actually have their hearing, and then the appeal will close out if there's no subsequent appeal from there. You can still settle at that point, at your appeal at any point, pretty much before that hearing time. But this is generally what the appeal life cycle is going to look like if you go all the way through the process through an appeal hearing. So as part of that merry-go-round, that central circle that we're trying to get to, we found that we had a lot of appeals that were probably not ready for a hearing date, but needed to move forward. They're kind of stuck for one reason or another. And so we have this new case management, which is really for a hands-on sort of detailed facilitation for specific appeals. And so, like I said, it's reserved for appeals who've been through several status conferences, who've had an opportunity to work with each other to figure out, okay, are you feel ready to move forward? Are you not? Why is this appeal stuck for some other reason? And so they'll work with a SBUE staff attorney who works with the parties to kind of mutually set goals to make sure this appeal's moving forward. So what we were finding a lot of times is they would, go through several status conferences. And they say, I think I'm almost there. I just need to get client approval. It's like, well, instead of having to come back, 45 days to see if that happened, let's get you with a case manager who can meet with you, follow up on a more proactive basis, make sure we set deadlines for when we expect to hear back from you. So oftentimes people are waiting on a site and visit. They're waiting for the assessor to come through and assess make a site inspection on the property and hear the results of that. Well, as we all have deadlines and calendars, part of the case management process is just making sure that that happens, that there's been a follow-up, there's a set date. And sometimes it's as simple as just setting a meeting time for everyone to come back and reconcur, hey, we did accomplish that. Sorry, I haven't gotten you a response. Here's where I came off of it. Just sort of making sure those appeals are moving forward. And again, that's really reserved for the appeals that have been pending that really are stuck for one reason. The parties just, despite their best attempts, have not been able to follow through on those those communications, trying to move those appeals forward. Since those appeals probably don't need to go to a contested case hearing, since the parties are otherwise working well together, don't want to kind of waste a hearing date and opportunity, but do want to make sure that they timely move that appeal forward in the process. And so that's case management. That's kind of a new program we've kind of started to pick up the last year, especially since the close of the Assessment Appeals Commission. And so I'm pretty excited for that. Pre-scheduling is also the second part of this prong, the kind of more individual scheduling. So we're kind of reserving this for appeals that are also, again, ready for that hearing date. So kind of the inverse. So you had appeals that were not quite ready for a hearing date. They're still working on it. And then you had appeals that maybe are ready for a hearing date, but don't want to have to wait till the next scheduling conference. And so that's what pre-scheduling is for. I always tell the parties that if you're working through things, you reach an impasse, contact us. We will get you through scheduling. And so pre-scheduling is what that's for. We have our appeals coordinator who will work with the parties to figure out that mutually agreeable hearing date on a more individual basis so that people aren't having to wait for a hearing date if they are ready for it. And so the goal was really to remove any barrier to parties who are ready for and needing a hearing date to get that appeal scheduled so we can get them scheduled as soon as possible. So those are some of the more functional updates from the board that we've done this past year. And then I'll hand it over to our sort of snapshot of where we are currently at and where we are currently at as compared to last year. So as a reminder, appeal filings versus appeal hearings. So this is the transfer process. So if we go back to that graphic, this is in part 4, where the appeal transfers from the comptroller's office side of the State Board of Equalization to the administrative procedure side of the State Board of Equalization. And so you'll see this conversion rate of parcel appeals. So we are on the parcel tax year specific side. So every tax year and parcel is pretty much going to have a specific appeal number. And so when I usually talk about appeals, I'm talking about those parcel specific and tax year specific. So for instance, you might see a shopping center that spans over 10 parcels. And that would be really considered one hearing. And so you'll have this conversion rate when you go from sort of parcel tax year to cases, as it were. And so this past year from January, we had 440 parcels refer over, which equated to 208 cases. So the mode is still 1-to-1, so you'll have one parcel, one case, but that certainly is not the average. The average has fluctuated over time, and so you'll see that's about 2-to-1. But in the past, we've had a conversion rate of 5-to-1, so it just depends on the volume and kind of what is making up our current appeal base. And so I got some updates from Administrative Procedures Division. So this year they've issued 562 orders. 100% of those were issued on time or early. 98% considered being issued early, and 2% issued on time. Issued on time means within that 90-day time frame that they're required to send those all out. So the vast majority are being sent out early. The average is 17 days early. And this graph is actually shows a lot of interesting information that we haven't really before had. This is part of the new sort of data that we're now capturing. So you can see the number open versus closed from residential and commercial. So you can see it's still pretty evenly split in terms of number of appeals that are getting referred to a hearing from commercial into residential. And I'll refer back to that too in a minute when we get to later in the slideshow. You can also see the hours worked. And so you can see that those residential and commercial hours are also the majority of it. But whereas residential makes up a far minority number of appeals filed to the State Board of Equalization, they are making up over half of the appeals referred for hearing. So it's an interesting sort of conversion in terms of what's actually being filed versus what needs to go to a hearing. And you can see in the hours worked, it's about a third of the hours are just our residential cases. And by worked, I mean, this is just judge hours. This isn't staff and all those other resources as well. And this isn't the scheduling phase. This is just you were referred over for a hearing. So you can see our appeals flow open and close. This is by calendar year. So the 2024 is a snapshot as of end of October. So keep that in mind. We still have some years left to go. So you can see this number fluctuates. This graph is most interesting to me as you go back to 2020 and you see that same disproportionate number closed versus opened. So it's kind of on track for regular appeal filings for the board, I would say, historically speaking. A large part of what you're seeing that 2024 year as well is some timeshare cases, which I'll talk to you about in a little more detail as well. So this is really the snapshot. I try to think, this is what I think of it as, is to say, where are we currently at as of October, end of October, this is November 1st, 2024, in terms of currently pending operations. So we have 7,000 total parcels pending, or that parcel tax year appeal base I was talking about. Of that, close to 1,000 are just those timeshares. So it really leaves us with almost 6,000 in terms of non-timeshare parcels pending. And then of that 6,000, close to 600 they're already on their way to a contested case. They have a case hearing scheduled. They've been referred to an administrative judge, or 200 of them have settled or withdrawn, and we're just waiting on trying to process those as soon as we can, just issuing signatures and get those out the door. So it really leaves us with an appeal base of about 5,330. Of that, the vast majority are in that merry-go-round currently. So they're scheduled for that status conference. The parties are working on them, and they know they have a follow-up date to make progress by. And we are working on trying to whittle those appeals down to which ones need case management, pre-scheduling, which ones need to go to a contested case hearing. And more importantly, all 3,000 of those have some sort of update on the calendar to be followed up on. And so of that, we still have about 2,000 that are just waiting to get on the merry-go-round, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute as well. 78 currently in case management, and then 37 in that pre-scheduling category.
Robin,
Mm-hmm.
Is there a rate at which cases filed go to hearing? Words of, is there a percentage of all cases filed?
I can probably get you one on that. I got to make a note on that. I don't think I've specifically prepared that as part of today. I'm trying to think if I had a hazard guess of like the specific, just like in terms of how many cases went to a hearing. It's the far minority of cases. Like I can tell you that off the bat, but I can find a specific percentage.
Thank you.
I guess on the previous slide, I may be looking at the wrong data, but I mean, it says non-timeshare parcels pending, 5,928, but 401 have been referred to administrative judge. So is that the kind of data we're looking for there? I mean,
oh yeah, that would be a good example. Yeah. Yeah, and you can see that too from this slide as well. You see 226 totally opened. So yeah, of the 5,000, so it's a pretty, most of our appeals end up in a settlement or withdrawal. Let me see where we were. Yeah. Further, so 533 is really what I think of the appeal base. That's really what we're looking at drilling down, because everything else is either on its way out or on its way to a hearing or has a settlement. And so we're really trying to boil down to, what's pending, how do we get it, how do we get out of the way and get those parties to the resolution that they want. And so of that 1927 awaiting scheduling, this is mostly appeals that have just been filed this year. So there's otherwise pretty recent filings as of I think August would have been the earliest date. Only 40 of them or 39 are really self-represented appeals. So we are trying to make sure we move those quickly as well. Partly, and self-represented means you can be self-represented small business, but really people who I would say otherwise are maybe unfamiliar with the appeal system. Whereas the vast majority, as you'll see, is at 1,800 number. So the vast majority of those currently awaiting scheduling are with an attorney or registered agent who's familiar with the state board process and already has other appeals of scheduling process. So if you're a registered agent, you're familiar with the board operations, you know how to get a hearing date, you know how to contact me, you know how to contact the board to get on that scheduling process. So by far, the appeals that are just waiting scheduling, those people, if they want a hearing date, know how to get one basically. Of the ones that are on that scheduling process with me, about a fourth of them, about 1,000 of that 4,000 number, if you want to round up, have been filed since June 2024. So we haven't waited. Also, we're trying to get those appeals as soon as they come in the door to get them on that scheduling process. And a third of them are scheduled for conference before the end of 2024. So we still have a lot to do left in the year. And then of that appeal base, again, the non-timeshare appeal parcel pending, that appeal base that we're looking at, really comes down to a numbers game. You'll see that later too. There are, really only a handful of counties that are really making up the bulk of appeals, and a handful of offices and a handful of representatives who are making up most of the appeal. And so in terms of just volume business, there's only so many people who are really making up the bulk share of appeals and trying to figure out they also are figuring out how best to process that number. So the timeshare appeal, we still have about 1,000 left pending. There was a Tennessee Supreme Court decision on the issue, on the primary issue, having dealing with these timeshare cases in Sevier County. It's really only 14 properties in the county. There's a couple other timeshares in Davidson County. There have been orders issued by administrative judges. Like I said, we had that Supreme Court decision. I think we had a bunch of cases just closed this past, last week as well. So we expect those to move off. I think there's a couple of potentially multiple day hearings in 2025. And the main issue, the reason why you're seeing that is because this primary issue of classification, as far as I can tell, is really not, the cliche argument is once we've litigated this, it'll be fine and it'll apply to all the other cases. And that's really not true. It's a reoccurring issue. There's no stare decisis for a legal term or res judicata on these two issues, because every tax year is seen as independent and specific. And so even though you might have received a decision that applied to tax year 2023, you can come back for 2024 and relitigate the entire thing, and try to differentiate the fact that over time some fact has changed. And although parties may contest whether they have or haven't changed, you're obviously going to have those appeals. They're going to continue to refile. We have worked with the parties to sort of consolidate those appeal filings as best as possible, but we do expect I do honestly expect to see them every year for a while. I don't know how long. I don't know how long until that issue otherwise finally does resolve. I just know that it's not bound by some of the other principles you might expect to see to bring conclusion to that issue. This is by appeal base, so kind of you can see the vast majority. So this is what I was referring to earlier of, almost 50% of all cases that go to a hearing are residential, but by far residential makes up a huge minority of the number of appeals filed to the State Board of Equalization. I don't know how, I think I can hover and maybe get the right exact percentages. Okay, not in this view, but as you can see, the commercial is primarily what we deal with, and residential is not even a third, but makes up a disproportionate number of hours spent in terms of hearing. Representation type as well. We see most of them are attorney. We have some registered agent, and then self-represented appeals are also a minority. So registered agent is the black, and then self-represented is the blue category. So these are really two companion slides. I have the 2023 audit committee slide from last year showing you where we were at our last audit committee versus where we're at this audit committee. And so you can see by that trend, we've reduced the number of those earlier appeal tax years. This is by tax year, not necessarily now time filing, time pending. You can see that those numbers have gone down, and this is kind of what we want to see. This is what we want to see. This is what we kind of expect to see in terms of, volume. That 2021 make up so many pending appeals last year that we still have more, but we've also reduced the volume of all tax years pending. And then we expect to see 2024 as the highest year pending. More so, I think, is the next two slides is the length of time pending. So we measured this by days pending. So literally, when was the appeal filed? How long was it pending? Was it 1 to 2 years, less than a year? And you can see that this has gone down amongst all categories except for less than 1, because those are our newly filed 2024 tax year filings that were received this year. But we pretty much have gone down. So the 1 to 2, it's a little bit weird to read. But what you're really looking at is that less than a year becomes a 1 to 2. The 1 to 2 becomes a 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on. And so Caterpillar down, you can see that we've processed them. We've reduced the length of time pending in all categories. We do have some that are 5+ years. That's pretty small minority. And like I said, all those appeals have a scheduling conference, have a way, or have already been scheduled for a hearing. So the last two slides are really the bottleneck, I think, as what I think of them as. I mean that in the most polite way I guess I could, other than to say that you're looking at the counties, the top 10 counties with the most appeals, and so that you can see that Davidson is just one office, and they represent 2/5 of almost all pending appeals for one office in the entire state. And so it is just in terms of volume a lot for them to get through. They are just one office. They do have an appeals team. Who appears on the scheduling conferences, and they work with the parties to try to reach settlements. They're doing it every day. We continue to resettlements from Davidson County. But in terms of how many admin hours they can process in a day, it really just comes down to, these top 10 counties and their ability to process those. They're just outside of the state board resources of how many staff they're going to have allocated for that. Conversely, you can see by agent as well. So one firm represents 3/5 of all pending appeals. As much as that is their choice and they are representing them, it is still one firm. And although they have different appeals, different clients, in terms of just man hours, they are one firm. And then you see those other tax consulting firms too down the line as well. Ryan is on here twice with 2 different agents, and so you could conceivably combine them. There have been also some combinations of consolidation of some. I think Altus Group and Ryan have somewhat consolidated. I think they're still in the process of that, but we have them on here separately because they're registered as different registered agents. That is the appeals update in a nutshell. That's kind of where we're at for this current tax year. Of course, if you have any other questions, I can try to find that the official percentage. I'll follow up with that as well. That takes care of the snapshot, as it were, of the board operations since last year. If you have any questions on that or any questions on our appeals base, feel free to let me know now or contact me later.
Great, very helpful. Great presentation. Appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, anything you want to cover? I think we're good.
Yeah, then the last item would be just adjournment.
All right, without objection.
Okay.
We're adjourned.